Hi guys. So we're here for our first of our ecology unit lessons. Okay. And so if you'll give me a moment. Okay, close that down. Present. If it'll let me. There we go. Okay. So we're looking at response to the environment. So how do different things respond to the environment? So the first thing we want to consider is behaviors. So I want you to think for a minute, how do behaviors in animals arise? What makes a certain animal act the way they do? Is it a natural occurrence? Is it something that's learned? How do they arise? What purpose do those behaviors serve? Obviously, if you're doing something, there's a reason for it, right? Okay, so with behavioral ecology, that's the study of how behaviors arise due to ecology and evolution. So we're going to find that there's actually a lot of things with ecology that cross over with evolution and what we've been talking about. And so we've actually talked a little in evolution. We started talking about ecology some, and we're going to continue. So when we talk about a behavior, we're talking about a response to a stimulus, whether it be an internal response, like turning around and walking away, or an external response, like hitting somebody who pokes you with a pin, right? So this brings in the idea, and we've talked about this before, of nature versus nurture. What aspect is genetic, nature, versus what is based on the environmental factors you've been exposed to, nurture. And what we found is that a lot of things are a combination of the two, that they may have a genetic or a nature background, but it requires the right environmental factors or right nurture to actually activate it. Behaviors are things that are going to allow for survival and reproduction. So a lot of those things tied with, for example, sexual selection, this connects to the idea of reproduction. So these behaviors that they perform allow for that reproduction to pass on the genetics and therefore allow for survival of the fittest. So behaviors are going to be subject to natural selection. Certain behaviors are going to be more successful than others, therefore allowing for reproduction and survival. So when it comes to understanding behavior, we have what we call the proximate cause, how the behavior occurs and how it's modified. So we're looking at how. So think about it this way. What was the stimulus that caused the behavior? So a male peacock sees a nice little pretty peahen that he's interested in. So he's going to start spreading his plumage and trying to show it off. How does the nurture component affect the behavior? So how do the experiences during growth and development influence the response? And then we have the ultimate cause, why a behavior occurs. So proximate is how it happens, ultimate is why it happens. So how does that behavior help the animal survive and reproduce? Well, obviously, if he has a big fancy plume and shows it off just right, he gets to mate with the female, right? How does the nature component affect the behavior? So in other words, what is the genetic aspect that's being passed on so that evolutionary basis of the behavior? Remember, when we're talking about evolution, we've got to talk about that genetic passed on. Just because there's a behavior, if it's not being passed on, it doesn't really play a role in evolution. So types of behavior. It can be innate or it can be learned. Innate behaviors are developmentally fixed. The natural suckling behavior of a newborn infant. That is an innate behavior. So hereditary born behaviors, things that don't actually need to be learned. You don't typically teach a baby how to suckle and therefore get their nutrition. This happens naturally. Experience during growth has no obvious effect on the behavior. So birds fly south for the winter. This is an innate behavior. It happens, and it doesn't matter what kind of experiences they have. This is a naturally occurring behavior. Learned behaviors are going to depend on environmental influence. So the experiences do affect these behaviors. There's a high variation of learned behaviors in a population, whereas innate behaviors tend to be everybody has the same basic behavior. There may be slight variations within that behavior, but that's still going to happen. Whereas learned behaviors, some will have it and some won't based on their experiences. So innate behaviors, we have what we call fixed action patterns, FAPs, a sequence of unlearned acts directly linked to a stimulus. The actions are unchangeable. This is going to happen, period, end of story, doesn't matter what else is going on. And they will be carried out to completion. So it's not, we'll start and then, oh, well, we don't need to finish. They're going to start all the way till it's finished. And they're typically triggered by some type of sign stimulus, some type of external cue that triggers that behavior. So for example, with stickleback fish, male stickleback fish have bright red bellies, unlike their female counterparts who have silver bellies. Male stickleback fish are highly territorial and will attack other males who enter their territory. When male sticklebacks see the color red, which is their sign stimulus, they become aggressive. In fact, it doesn't even have to be another male fish. Anytime they see the color red, they become highly irritated, aggressive, and attack. So the sign stimulus, the thing that causes this behavior, is that color. So you could put a red rock in with these fish and they're going to become aggressive and start to attack because they see that red color, and they're going to continue to attack until they complete the behavior and they get that male fish to go away. Migration is also considered an innate behavior. It's a regular long distance change in location. And this is typically triggered by environmental cues. It may be the sun's position or the Earth's magnetic field. Some of these, we're not exactly sure what exactly it is, maybe a combination of the two. There also could be celestial cues that cause these changes in location. And then we have signal. A signal is a stimulus that is generated and transmitted from one animal to another. So this is a form of animal communication. Have you ever watched a white-tailed deer when all of a sudden you catch their attention or something happens and they flip that tail up so you see the white side of the tail? So it may be a visual, auditory, tactile, electrical, or chemical signal that's going to pass it on. For example, pheromones would be considered a chemical signal. They're chemicals that are emitted by members of a species that can affect other members of the same species. Stimulus response chains would be an example of a signal. This is when a response to a stimulus serves as the next stimulus for a behavior. So you get the initial stimulus, which then leads to another one, which leads to another one, until ultimately the behavior occurs. We see this in particular with animal courtships, where first they spread out the tail feathers, Then they start to move in a certain pattern, things like that. So there's like a series of behaviors that have to happen before courtship and mating would occur. Body movement would be another aspect when it comes to a signal. The waggle dance in bees actually sends a message to the other bees. So what do we mean when we talk about the waggle dance? In the early 1900s, it was discovered that honeybees communicate through body movements that resemble dancing. And so we hear a lot about bees dancing. Today, it is known as the waggle dance. Worker bees will gather around a bee that has returned to the hive after foraging. The returned bee will shake its abdomen and form a figure-8 shape to tell other bees the direction where food can be found. So the bee is actually doing a dance based on a specific pattern that will direct the bees in terms of the direction and distance that they need to travel to find the food. Okay, directed movements is another type of innate behavior. So this is a movement towards or away from a stimulus. Kinesis is like a random movement in response to a stimulus, and it's not really directional. It's just like somebody pokes you with a pin, and typically your hand's going to move away from that pin. It may move, it doesn't move always in the exact same direction. It's just moving away from the stimulus. Taxis will be directional, so it's going to be towards, that means positive, or away, negative, from a stimulus. White blood cells in particular will use what we call chemotaxis. It will actually move towards the chemical signals that are guiding them to a point of infection. Phototaxis would be response to light. So we're going to move towards or away from light. That plays a big role in terms of the tropisms that we find with plants. Chemotaxis, movement in response to chemical signals, and that's what I was talking about with the white blood cells. Geotaxis, movement in response to gravity. So plant seeds, the roots grow down, the stems grow up. The plant grows in this direction, these directions based on gravity. We also call that gravitropism. And this responds to gravity. They've actually grown seeds in outer space where there is no specific gravity, and the roots just grow all over the place, as do the stems. So let's stop for a moment and let's think, what are possible proximal and ultimate causes for a fixed pattern action in male stickleback fish? Okay, and so if you think about it, we know that the red coloration is the Y. The Y is because they want to get rid of, so ultimate Y, they want to get rid of competition, so they don't want the other male where they could get there. The how has to do with that innate behavior that they have to take to completion of aggressive and attacking due to the red coloration. Learning. So learned behaviors are the ones that are going to be based on experience. So imprinting, long-lasting behavioral response to individuals. Baby ducks imprint on mama and follow her. That's, people have been the first thing that baby ducks are exposed to, and they imprinted on people. We also see it with other animals. So this is something that happens during a sensitive period of development, typically really early in life. Imprinting occurs on the first individual they encounter. So if the first thing the baby ducks see is a cat, they'll imprint on the cat. So ducks following mom, because normally mom's the first one they see, since mom's typically on the nest. Spatial learning, to establish memories based on the spatial structure of the animal surrounding. So they might learn certain areas of the tree, things like that. So animals will form what they call a cognitive map, so a map in their brain, or they'll use landmarks as environmental cues that this is the area that they live and range in. So this is how birds will find their hidden nest, is they actually have like little cues as to where they hid the nest, because they want to hide it so nobody else finds it and attacks the babies. Associative learning, the ability to associate one environmental feature with another. So we associate monarch butterflies with a foul taste. They taste very bitter. Well, you learn, and so you learn not to eat the butterflies that look like that because they taste bad. Social learning, learning through observation and imitation of observed behaviors. We see mama doing something and we learn to do it just like mama did. So chimps break open oil palm nuts because they see other chimps breaking open oil palm nuts. That's how they learn. So proximal and ultimal causes for imprinting in ducks. Why do they imprint? Because, so that's the ultimate. Why? Well, they're going to imprint on mama because she's going to help guide, train, and protect them. The proximal is the how, and that is that innate, that the first thing they see is what they imprint on. So this takes us back to that idea of natural selection, favoring certain behaviors, whether it be innate behaviors or learned behaviors. We're favoring behaviors that are going to increase survival and reproduction, because remember, with evolution, with natural selection, it's all about surviving and reproducing. So foraging, food obtaining behavior is going to favor survival. So this is where you learn how to search for, recognize, and capture food items. That's why they always say all these captive raised animals, don't just release them in the wild, because they don't know how to find food and they will die, they'll starve to death. Animals that are better at foraging will be more successful in finding food. Therefore, they survive and hopefully reproduce. Mating behaviors, there are animals that are monogamous and those that are polygamous, or polygyny, polyandry. So sexual dimorphism can actually result from sexual selection. Cooperative behaviors tend to increase fitness. So predator warnings, kin selection, pack behavior, these group behaviors actually can help a larger number survive and reproduce. Altruism would be a selfless behavior, so even if it risks them, they'll still send out the signal to let everybody else know that there's something there that could attack them, even though that makes them stand out and maybe they're going to get attacked. So altruism will actually reduce the individual's fitness, but increases fitness for the rest of the population. And remember, populations are what evolves. So naked mole rat colonies have only one reproducing female who will only mate with a few males. The other members will sacrifice themselves to protect the king and queen, the kings and queens. They will give themselves up to protect the reproducing individuals. Responses in plants. Since photosynthesis is critical to a plant's survival, plants can respond to light. Phototropism, I was mentioning that earlier, directional response that allows plants to grow towards, and in some cases, away from a light source. And we see this in those videos with the sunflowers following the sun. They're actually moving and following the sunlight. Photoperiodism allows plants to develop in response to day's length. So plants will only flower at a certain time of the year based on how long is their sun or how little sun is available at any point. Plants have mechanisms to defend themselves against herbivory, physical defenses like thorns, trichomes, which are little like hairs that are all kind of painful and sticky. They have chemical defenses like toxic or distasteful compounds, so nothing wants to eat them. Lima bean plants that are being damaged release chemicals that surround surrounding lima bean plants can sense, and then they will release compounds making themselves less susceptible to be eaten. So basically, the one who's already being damaged lets the other ones know so they can protect themselves. Soil composition can also affect plants. The pH of the soil can affect flower color in some plants. Nutrients are more accessible at certain pHs. Hydrangea blooms turn different colors based on soil pH. They're typically blue when it's around 5, they're pink when it's around 7. So practice-free response question. Walking in the woods, a researcher encountered a group of ravens feeding on the carcass of a moose. The birds were being unusually loud. The researcher realized that the loud calls of the ravens were attracting more ravens to the area so they could also feed. So this is helping out the rest of the group. This is striking contrast to other species where food is defended. Discuss the possible proximal and ultimate causes for the raven's behavior while feeding. Identify one reason why other species may defend their food. Okay, so hopefully that gives y'all a little something. Thanks for your time. I'll see you in the next lesson.